Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Bean and I'm joined by Chris Kent. Mr. Kent?
Hello, sir.
Today we're going to talk about how we can leverage both effective and efficient teaching while on the training floor. So, Mr. Kent, how important do you think it is to be both effective and efficient on the teaching floor?
I think they're both very important.
And why? What happens if we're not effective or efficient on the floor? How does that affect our students?
I think if we are not effective, then obviously we're not getting our information across in a good way or a productive way. If we're not efficient, then we're wasting time that could be used to better our students or deliver more information or run different drills or have a better class. So being able to do our job well and do our job in a timely fashion is very important to not only martial arts, but I think teaching in any setting.
Okay, and if you had to pick one of those, both either effective or efficient, which one would you say is more important than the other?
I do think they work off each other. Being effective and efficient are being effective is going to make being efficient easier, and being efficient is going to help you to become more effective. But if I have to pick one of them, I believe efficiency would reign over the effectiveness.
Okay. Yeah, and really having a proper balance between the two is really going to be important to your productivity while you're on the floor. If you're trying to be too efficient, you may cut your productivity out by taking out drills or movements that are actually necessary for the students to learn. You want to get your point across with the least amount of extra information possible. If you're giving a dissertation each time you step on the teaching floor, you stop the class, you talk for half an hour to instruct the next move, you're going to be losing valuable class time. The students are losing out on the necessary training for them to actually learn and understand how that movement is done. They may understand all of the background, the history of how that move is and why it is there and every other aspect of it, but when it comes to them to physically do the movement, they're not going to be able to because they don't have the reps on it. And the reps, well, they're very important.
You have to think as well that they don't come to the martial arts class to sit there for 45 minutes and listen to you talk the whole time. They come to be active and have fun and get their bodies moving and actually do things. So when you take more than half the class to deliver your dissertation on a move or the history of a move or all the things that you could talk about this move, you are essentially stealing or robbing that student of that valuable time they could be practicing or moving around or doing things that keep them active and help them to reinforce their movements and techniques. So spending too much time talking is detrimental on many levels and not only hurting your efficiency, but also the effectiveness of teaching.
Yeah, really when you're demonstrating a move or explaining how it's done, your students need to understand how and why to perform the move. Of course, this will aid their understanding, but all of this needs to be kept brief enough to get your point across so that they can actually go and do the moves on a partner in the air or up and down the floor, whatever it is. They need to actually get time on doing the moves to help their body understand it. And we talked about the learning styles already. Sure, you have, I'm sure, students in your class that are auditory learners. And those students will perhaps benefit from a dissertation on the move. But not everybody learns that way. And like he said, your students don't come to class to listen to you talk for 45 minutes and then do two moves. Okay, well, that's the end of class because that's all we got time for today. They're not going to be learning anything. So keeping your explanations brief enough that they get the information necessary for them to understand and go and do the move in a safe manner, but also so they can get reps on it because that is where the learning is going to happen at.
Even when you are talking a lot, whether it be a mat chat or a demonstration or whatever it happens to be, if you plan to talk a lot, try to interject or try to give your students an opportunity to be engaged and to give you feedback. So instead of you talking nonstop for 7 minutes at a time, say a few things and then ask a question and pick on a few students, have them give you some feedback, give you some answers, or as you're talking, end a sentence with some sort of response. So, I say, hey, does that make sense? And the students know to say, oh, yes, sir. Or if it doesn't make sense, they say, no, sir. And then we take a second and work through that together. But again, keeping them engaged by having them respond to you or posing questions that they can give you answers to helps to kind of break up some of that monotony of you speaking and speaking and speaking and talking and just delivering too many words. So that's not the way to make that speech last 45 minutes. Is just to interject something every few minutes. Still try and keep it brief and short, but those things can help you to keep their focus and keep them engaged if you have to, or you need to talk a little bit more than normal.
Yeah, and a great way to get the students involved and piggybacking on what you said there was if you have a move. So let's say we're working on low block in a class, and you've been working on low block for a while. They know low block, and now okay, we're going to put this movement into a pattern, and it's going to be low block, low block, low block, and then you give them an opportunity. You have a pause. You give them an opportunity to fill in the blank, and so and maybe that's too basic of a explanation or to explain that, but giving them a opportunity to understand that they have an opportunity to interject whatever the next word is. Set up a situation that they can finish your sentence, because that will really get the students involved in not only what you're talking about, but how you're teaching it, and making sure that really that they're paying attention, because they don't want to be that person that, oh man, I was supposed to say something, or I missed it. So they want to have that input, that interjection into being able to finish your sentence, and that's a great place to position yourself as the instructor.
It's a great check-in, because like you said, if you give them the chance to fill in that blank, you'll know whether they're listening to you or not, whether they know what goes in that blank. Or if they don't say anything, then you know, okay, I've lost their attention, I've lost their focus, or I didn't explain or deliver the information well enough that they don't know the answer to that. So that helps to, like you said, keep them focused and kind of break some of that up. But then it gives you kind of a check-in of how well they're paying attention and how well you are doing delivering that information.
Absolutely. If you need your students to know the history of how or why a move is done, I think that's great. But I would suggest separating the learning of the move from the history lesson of the move. If your demonstration takes up too much time because of you are giving a history lesson, that can cause the flow of your class to slow down. Again, that cuts into the reps and the actual learning of the movement. So I think a way to do this is twofold. One, you can have them do the movement and then come back and interject the history at a few points later on, or you can give a small tidbit of information about the history, then you do the move, and then you give a little bit of more information about the history, and then you do the move. And each time you do that move, you touch on the history, you have a quick review, and then okay, how many moves are in this one? Okay, why do we do it? Okay, great, now let's do it. Okay, who made this one? Okay, why do we do it? Okay, and how many moves? Okay, then you do it. And so having that little points of impact on the history, I think will do a couple things. Number one, if you're giving too much verbal explanation while you're demonstrating the moves, some of your students will be able to pick up on that and learn that way, but others are going to shut down. That's not going to be helpful for them. And so just keep that in check. And another part to that is if you deliver the information all at one time, that's potentially going to overload some or most or all of your students. So giving just a little bit and then doing the move, and then a little bit of review, and then a little bit new, and then do the move. And then each time you do the move, if you just add on the small pieces of information, by the time you test, you should have more than enough time, or you can strategically allow enough time in your class to review that information and give those small touches on the history so they are up to speed and ready to test on however you plan to do that.
That is a great teaching tool, not only for breaking up long explanations or delivering a lot of information over time, but breaking things up into small bits and letting everything build on top of it. Because I would argue, at least the way that our curriculum and our karate studio is run, everything is compounding and building on top of each other. So when you start at white belt, you learn a move that you're going to continue to use until the higher levels of black belt. And so everything is a continuation and a building on top of. So rather than piling on a whole bunch of stuff at once, You start by building a foundation, and then you build on top of that foundation, and piece by piece by piece by piece by piece until you have that larger type structure, instead of dropping the whole thing at once. And, I think it's like to your point, delivering some of that historical information or the more technical information or those small tidbits can be done over time, and being and keeping up the repetition and being consistent with saying those things or asking those questions, so they're constantly being prodded to remember those things and recall what that information is, helps to, I think, solidify that more than just dumping it all at once and expecting them to remember a whole bunch of stuff. Because it's easier for me to remember one bit of information than it is to remember 7 bits of information at once. So if I can deliver those 7 bits of information one at a time, slowly, in theory and in practice, it should be a lot easier for them to remember those things. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how the history and the techniques and the small minutia of some techniques, I think, are nice to know. They're important to know, and they can help you as you're training, but they're also not a necessity. And what I mean by that is, when you're a white belt, I'm not going to explain every single detail of a simple block to you. I'm going to show you what it is, make sure you know how to do it. And then as you continue through the ranks, as you continue to train, as you continue to deepen your understanding of the martial arts as a whole, then I try to impart those things upon you. And I don't want to bombard someone who's beginning with all this technical information. And this is what your hips are doing. This is where your hand is going. This is the degree your foot should be pointing. This is how your knee should be bent. This is where all these things are happening, because that's just too complicated. So I would argue that the history and those small details of the techniques are important, but to help you as an instructor, give it simply at first. And then as time goes on, you can add on those details and add on those different structures. And I wouldn't expect a white belt to know the different degrees and positions and hip motions and everything right away until later, because that stuff, it's like another level, and it's just extra, in my opinion. I'd rather you know how to do the low block than be able to explain everything to me. Of course, I would like both, but I might expect that later from you when you're a higher belt rather than just a beginner.
I think a key point to effective and efficient teaching is your mindset, your expectations that you set for your students. If you are expecting them to learn 100 moves in 100 classes, that might be too many for some students. It might be too few for other students. And so being able to set expectations correctly, I think, is a important part of how you are viewing yourself as you're effective or you're efficient, and the balance between the two. Because I think it's very easy to set up a situation where your expectations are too high, and that will cause you to think that you are not effective or efficient, or that your expectations are too low, and then you over-evaluate yourself and think that you are more efficient or effective than you actually might be. And so being able to temper that and have a good balance between your expectations, your effectiveness, and your efficientness, I think, is a important part to this as well.
And as we already talked about, effective and efficient go hand in hand. And I was thinking of an example where we want to make sure that it is almost foolproof that some of this information is being delivered. That way no one forgets. Because the reason I was thinking about that is there could be something that happens. I just had a student that forgot his uniform. He didn't bring his uniform. And so he showed up to class and just continued on like nothing happened. And I was sitting there thinking, where's this guy's stuff? Like, why isn't this guy prepared for his class? Now, I figured it was self-explanatory, but no one had ever told him that he needed to have his uniform for every class. No one ever told him there was repercussions for not bringing his gear to class. And so I was able to have the foresight before class not to say anything, because I number one, I was baffled because he just showed up with nothing. I was like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to train in class today. And I'm thinking to myself, where's your gear, man? Like, you can't be here without your uniform. But I had never told that to him. I had never set up that expectation to him. And so I had to take a second to myself and think, is it reasonable for me to punish him or to be upset at him for something he didn't know? And that's my responsibility. And so the way this ties into effective and efficient is if you have these situations where, maybe studio wide or business wise or across the board for everybody, you expect certain things. You need to make sure they understand those expectations. And then when those things happen, you can say, hey, you knew that I expected this, or you knew this was what you needed to do, or you knew that this was the standard that we hold ourselves to. And so this is why this is happening, because you didn't do what we asked you to do, or you didn't do what was expected of you. But again, the point is that we have to make sure we set up those expectations and communicate those expectations. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to live up to them. And so rather than try to remember every time to set up those expectations or deliver that information, being efficient and effective in doing that by making that part of your lesson, or making that part of your class, and making that part of your sign up process, so that everybody is aware and everyone knows. And then as effectively is being done, no matter who you are, no matter what time it is, you have the resources and you have been given that information, so that you know what's expected of you and you know what the standards are for you as a student.
Yeah, and on top of that, you know what's going to happen if you don't live up to those expectations. And then being the instructor, you need to be able to hold people accountable and do what you say that you're going to do. I think is a big part to that as well. Yes. So one key to effective teaching is knowing what you're going to say before you start. You should not be searching for words while you're teaching your class. You need to have, not that you need to have each word scripted out, but you need to be able to stay on topic. If you're making things up as you go, that's where you're going to start to be rambling and get off topic quickly.
Not to mention, you might not sound like you know what you're talking about, because you're trying to search for that information. You're trying to search for those key descriptors as you're talking, and it just sounds like you're pulling something out of your back pocket, or you're making something up as you go. So a part of appearing knowledgeable and actually being knowledgeable, like you said, is having those, or having that idea of where you're going to end up before you start. And not that everything needs to be scripted out, but maybe some things can be. Certain games we play or certain techniques we teach, I say the same thing every single time, and it just works. It's effective and it's efficient because I don't have to think about it. I can basically turn my brain off, and I know exactly how I'm going to describe this game, or exactly how to describe this move, or exactly how the beginning of class goes, or even the mat chats we do. We've done them so many times. We know what they're going to be, and that does make us more efficient and more effective, because we don't have to take that time to stumble through or read every word or think about where we're going, because we already know where it's going to end up.
Yeah, and I think a good tool that you can use to help to improve your effective and efficientness on the floor is to record your class, and record it from the viewpoint of the parents. When you're watching this back, take note of how a few things go. Watch how motivating the class was. How much downtime did the students have? How many times did you need to repeat yourself while you were demonstrating a move? And what was the flow of the class like? So if you are demonstrating a move and your students aren't able to hear or see you, or you're not loud enough as you're doing this, then you're going to have to redo it over and over and over again. That's a time waster. If you have time periods where your students are standing around waiting for you to set up the next drill, or waiting for somebody to finish something until they have their turn to do it, or whatever it is, if there's time period where your students are just standing there doing nothing, that is a huge time waste. If your class wasn't very motivating, that means you are continually trying to start that motivation process. And fortunately for motivation, most of the time, once you get one or two students motivated and doing what they're supposed to do and doing it with high energy, that'll start to overflow to others, and that just happens. And it'll continue to happen until that goes away. Either those students die out, they get tired, or you stop delivering that motivation to them. But sometimes getting that going can be a time waste as well, because you're doing extra things, or you're doing them extra loudly, or extra importantly, or extra funly, or however, so that you can get the motivation started. And just as you're watching that recording back, take note of those things. And we've talked before about being the best martial arts instructor in the world. As you're watching that recording back, watch it from those eyes. As you're watching that back, are you doing all of those things that you set up for yourself, all of those qualities that you had? I would have to imagine that being a effective and efficient teacher is going to be on the best martial arts instructor in the world's list. And so if you're not those things, then think about how you can change those or tweaks that you can make to your class to improve those. Now, I will say this, and maybe you know this already, and maybe not, but just the simple fact of recording a class, you know that class is being recorded. You know that you're going to, at some point, going to go back and watch that. And so because the class is recording, you are likely going to teach differently than you would on a standard class. Just because you know it's going to be recorded and you know that somebody, even if it's just you, is going to go back and watch this class. And so because of that, I would maybe recommend recording a few classes. One, so that you can see a variety of different classes, different class structures and flows and drills and movements as you're watching them back. But also so that you are less aware that you're being recorded. And so maybe that will help to get you back in a quote unquote normal teaching mode, as opposed to, well, I'm being recorded, I better do this really good because I'm going to go back and watch this and I want to see that I did really, really good when I was teaching. It just the simple fact of having the camera there and hitting record and then doing it is going to change how you teach. And for it, I believe that will change your teaching for the better, to be fair, but it's not going to be a genuine look at how you normally are teaching a class. So just keep that in mind as you're watching that back or as you go through that process.
As we mentioned in the best martial arts instructor in the world, that you are that actor, you are playing that part. And so being able to watch from an audience type perspective of recording your class and seeing for the actual sense of the word, how you are performing, how you are looking on the floor, and how the flow is going, how everyone is responding, and being able to watch on the outside. Of course, you have an insight of what's happening because this is your profession, this is what you know what's going on. But again, watching from the outside and seeing how everyone is responding to you and how the class is going can be a good way to kind of analyze yourself from the outside and make sure, like you said, that you are checking off the things on the list of what you think should be your best, making sure you're becoming that. And another way that can be done, as long as it's feasible and you have someone else there with you, is I started doing this in our black belt class this week, is I have one of the other instructors run the class. And whenever it's possible, I participate in that class. So I'm on the floor with them. I'm doing the techniques with them. I'm doing the drills with them. I'm doing the exercises with them. And as a head instructor overseeing other instructors, that's a great way to evaluate or to analyze how they are teaching. And it helps me to be able to give them some extra tips and say, hey, at this point, if you would have said this or done this, that would have made it flow better, or that would have made sure everyone understood what you're talking about, or everyone that was able to do what you wanted them to do. And of course, I'm not going to do this at a white belt level, at a beginner level, because I need to be there to help instruct them and walk them through. But as I said, I did it for the black belts, and our instructors are capable of leading those classes and doing those things, and black belts are capable of knowing what we expect from them because they've been with us for a long time. But again, that was a great way for me to remove myself from the situation and have a different kind of perspective to the class. So I'm not watching from the sideline and seeing everything happen. I'm actually being there and getting to experience how the students are experiencing their classes and how the students are receiving that information, or responding to the motivators and different things that are happening. So again, that's not feasible for everything, but I think it kind of goes along with the idea of recording your class, is taking a different perspective or different approach to the class that's happening, and then you have a better understanding of what your students are feeling like, or what your students are hearing, and being able to give more genuine feedback on some of that stuff. So that's just a different perspective of the class and how you can evaluate whether your class is efficient and effective during your teaching. Have
a go-to list of analogies when you're teaching common moves. This This can be like a database that you have. You teach these same moves over and over and over again. I'm sure so many times that some of them you are so tired and bored with teaching. And that's okay as long as you give it in a motivating and energetic and charismatic way to the students. But that aside, have a database of verbs and explanations and visual pictures that you can paint for your students, and have that as a ever-changing database, meaning you have this one that you use and you use it and use it and use it and it works all this time, and then you use it, oh, it didn't work. You use it again, oh, it didn't work. Okay, well, scratch that one out. Let's try something different. And then you have to evolve and change those things as you go to make sure it stays relative and important and engaging for the students, so they can really have that clear picture of whatever it is that you're explaining in their heads.
I mentioned this just a little bit ago too, and it helps to make that class more efficient, because if you don't have to take the time to stop and think about what you're going to say, it saves you time and it lets the class flow better. And I think the best part about this is it gives them something to think back to or to refer to. So when I give them that analogy, as they're practicing in their head, they can think through the words I said or think through the analogy, and it helps them to do their technique. Even if they think about that every single time they do the technique, if it helps them to do the technique, then great. That's an effective tool that I can use to help them as they're training. So having, like you said, that database of all the different phrases and tools, and getting rid of the ones that don't work and adopting new ones that do work, is going to be vital for you when you're working at being efficient but also effective with your teaching.
Yeah, and if you think back when you were learning spelling words as a kid, I'm sure your mom or dad, whoever was helping you with these spelling words, they may have given you tips or tricks on how to remember to spell these words. And as you're on the spelling test, I know I can remember, my mom tell me, hey, remember this, and then it's going to help you remember how to spell. I can vividly remember some of those. And as I'm spelling that, maybe not now so much, but as I was spelling that word on the spelling test, I can remember, oh yeah, she told me this, and then that's going to help me. And then I could recall that information while I was on my spelling test to help me remember how to spell that word. And so giving that tool or teaching in that way, I think will really help the students to recall the information. And like you said, even if they have to think of that every time that they do that move, that's fine. As long as they're doing the move correctly in the way that you would like them to do the move, then that's great.
Just like in your training too, I think the repetition and the consistency of these things is important. So us as instructors, when we're working on these analogies or these teaching devices, practicing them and rehearsing them is going to make it a whole lot easier when it comes time to deliver that, because we don't have to think about what I was supposed to say. I don't have to remember the words that I wanted to use. So if you have these great analogies or these great shortcuts, if you will, to teaching these moves, practice them and rehearse them. That way you can deliver them effectively and your class can be more efficient, and both those things can work together. So just in the same way you would train a move many, many times to make sure that you remember it, practice these devices and these tools and these phrases and practice them repeatedly. That way when it comes time to deliver them, it's more fluid and second nature to you, and that's going to improve that efficiency and effectiveness as well.
Yeah. The better you know your material, the easier it's going to be for you to share that with others. The more fluid your class will be. If you're trying to remember how to teach something or remember how to do something, being able to teach it in an effective or efficient manner is going to be tough. And so I think, maybe step one to being an effective and efficient teacher is know your moves, know your material, not just the teaching aspect of it and how you're going to teach it and the verbs that you're going to use and the word pictures that you're going to paint for your students, but actually know how to do the moves, because they say to teach is to learn twice, but if you haven't learned it the first time, learning it first and second on the floor while you're trying to deliver it to a class is not the time to do it. So really know and understand your material before you go and try to share it with others.
As we've mentioned, our goal isn't to be infallible. Our goal isn't to know everything all the time. And so keeping that in mind, we have to, or we should be wanting to look back and refresh on these things. Even if it's a move that you taught 3 months ago, if you know you're going to teach that move today, maybe look back at your references or ask somebody else or run through the techniques. That way you know that you actually know, because the worst thing that can happen is you think, oh yeah, I know how to do this move, and it comes time to do the move and you freeze up and you don't know what to do. So even if it's at the beginning of the week, you take a look at your whole lesson plan for the next few days, and then you take some time to practice all the things you're going to teach, or even better, the night before or the night of. I'm there a half hour early, or I'm there 20 minutes early, and I look at the plan for the night. I rehearse to myself the things that we're going to be doing, or if I don't remember something, I go and find out how to do that and practice that myself to keep that fresh in your mind. So again, we don't have to know everything all the time, but part of being effective and efficient is using your resources. So just like you said, having that foresight to think through what's going to happen and make sure that you know that thing, you know that information for yourself that's going to help you to teach better. Because as you said, teaching is learning twice. You have to learn the move, but then knowing how to teach that move is the whole next level to it. So if you don't do that first step in knowing the move yourself, how are you going to expect to be able to teach that move? And I think that is a huge mental shift as well, because I've seen many students who can do techniques very well, and I say, okay, can you work with this person on it? And then they're completely dumbfounded. They say, I don't know what to do. And we've been teaching them for 4 years. They've seen all the tools and devices and tips and tricks, and they can actually know those moves really well, but it's a whole different side of your training and your techniques. And so that also helps us to be more effective, because we're constantly in it. We're constantly viewing it from different perspectives and different sides and stuff. And I think we could all agree that teaching is way different than doing, but doing helps you when it comes time to be teaching.
I'm sure at some point you've heard the phrase, those who can do and those who can't teach. I think that is completely false when it comes to martial arts, because if you can't do the moves yourself, there's no way that you're going to be able to share those moves with others. It's going to be near impossible for you to teach others how to do something that you yourself cannot do as a martial art instructor.
Not to mention whether it's right of me or not, but if in any facet I have someone who's trying to tell me what to do, and I even think to any degree that they can't do what they're expecting me to do, I'm not going to be motivated, or I'm not going to have the desire to listen to them or think that they're credible. And so, as you said, in martial arts, I think that's even more exemplified. If I have an instructor who's asking me to kick up to my head height, but I've never seen them do it, in my head, I'm already writing them off or thinking less of them, because they're expecting me to do something that they can't do themselves. So I think that's an important trait of any leader, is to be willing to do anything that you would ask someone else to do. But especially in martial arts teaching, if, as we talked about, that law of the lid, if you want them to perform well and do a great job, then you need to be able to do that as well and show them what you expect, or live up to those expectations yourself. So again, that phrase doesn't really apply to martial arts, in the sense that we need to be able to hold ourselves to the same standards or higher standards, and we're holding other people to, and then live up to those standards. That way they can see us do that and have that goal or that motivation, or at the very least, we're backing up what we're saying, which again is an important thing in being an instructor.
Let's dive into how you can be more effective or efficient on your teaching floor. I want you to think of an area that either you struggle teaching your students, or an area that your students struggle learning and information. A common sticking point, as it were. Try to dissect that, both from the viewpoint of the instructor and from the viewpoint of the student, and think about ways that you can ease that process. How can you make that better, not only for you, the instructor, to teach that information, but how can you make it easier and more efficient or better for the student to learn that information? How can we fix that and make that common sticking point just another move that you do? I think that everybody, whether it doesn't matter what art that you do or what type of teacher you are, even us, we have areas on the floor that are common sticking points. Now, as you grow and become better as an instructor, I think that those sticking points get fewer and fewer or the minuteness of those common sticking points gets smaller and smaller. But regardless, there are some areas that you are teaching that the students are having troubles learning, or that you yourself are having struggles getting the students to do correctly. And so finding those areas and then thinking about how you can improve upon those and make those more efficient or more effective for your students to learn or for you to teach, I think is a great area to start with this type of mindset. Dissect that again from both sides, and even maybe from an outside perspective. Try to teach it to a lay person, somebody that's not in martial arts. And coming up with those key strategies and processes and having that tool bank, I think will help to grow you as an instructor, because once you start to do that with one sticking point, then you can move to the next and the next and next. And like I said, then those common sticking points become less common and they're just a common move. And then you move to the next one on down the list. And then at some point you'll run out of big sticking points, and then you'll have these small sticking points, tough little extra informations, or, oh, you know what, now everybody's got this really good, but I think they could fix this, everybody could fix this little small area. And then you go through and you fix those. And however small you get with those, there'll always be something, some sort of sticking point for your students, or some sort of sticking point for either you or for somebody on your team while teaching a move. And I think a good place to start, again, with this mindset is with those.
What we're talking about is solving problems before they happen.
Or even realizing that there is a problem and then doing something about it.
Right, but that with the goal of solving that problem before it happens. And I say that because you're going to come across these common sticking points and these common issues that everyone has. But like you said, you identify what those are, and then you work through how to best address them and how to stop that from happening again in the future. And then you work your way down the list. And I think the important thing there is that you don't shy away from them. So if you're in the class and you notice something isn't working, maybe you need to take a step back from that and move on to something else at the time. But then you come back and you revisit that. You try to solve that problem rather than just never do that thing again because it wasn't a good, it didn't work well, or it gave you an issue. But
or to think, oh, you know what, maybe these kids just aren't ready for that. We'll try it again next time and it'll be better. And it isn't better because you didn't change anything about it. You did it the exact same way, and you expected the students to live up to whatever it was failed explanation that you gave them.
And to go back to your tool bank analogy, when you have a tool that you don't know how to use, you don't get rid of it because you don't know how to use it. You keep the tool and you figure out how to use it, and you decide when and where that tool is most effective. And the same thing with our drills and activities. We don't want to completely throw something out. If it has a purpose that we can use, we need to determine and find out how that can be best used, and where, when, and why that drill or exercise should be used, and we don't completely abandon it. So again, I think this all is the idea of solving a problem before it happens. We run into those issues, we find out why they're an issue, we find out how to best deal with them, and then we implement that to stop that problem before it happens. And then we move on to the next one that comes up, or move on to the next one that comes up, or a brand new one comes up and we have to solve that. So being able to foresee those road bumps or those roadblocks before they happen, and put systems and processes in place to get past those, I think is at the heart of being efficient and effective when we're teaching.
So as far as teaching effectively or efficiently, do you have anything else to add, sir?
I think it's important to have that end goal. And as I said, emphasize even to the students or to your staff or just to yourself that this is a continual project, and it's continually building. So as I said, you lay the foundation and you build on top of it, and you build on top of it, and you build on top of it. And the way you can simply describe that to your students is say, hey, today we did this. make sure you go home and practice that, because the next move is going to work on top of that. And if you don't have that solid foundation, when I try to add on the next move, your foundation is going to crumble and it's not going to work out. So just remembering that this is one thing building on top of another thing can help us to reinforce or stress the importance of training, but also being efficient and effective, because you want to be able to go back and touch on those things that are foundational or those things that came before, and having quick ways of doing that, or making sure that you, the first time you taught it effectively, that way you don't have to reteach it or go back and cover the things many times is important. So remembering that it's all a compounding thing and it all works together, I think is a good reminder to be efficient when reviewing and effective when you're teaching. That way everything can be one cohesive unit, and we as instructors are good at what we do, and then our students can improve and receive the best instruction from us, because we have those systems and processes to hand them the keys of success.
I think that's a great wrap for being a effective and efficient teacher.
I neglected to ask you earlier. You had asked me, but out of the two, if you had to pick one, which one do you think is the most important?
If I had to pick a choice between effective or efficient, I think I would choose efficient, because if I'm efficient, I am going to be thinking about how to strategically pare down the processes and explanations. And I think if I am more efficient while I'm explaining or demonstrating or leading or teaching a class, I think that being effective will be right there. They go hand in hand. And I think it's hard to be one without the other. But if I had to choose, I think I would choose efficient.
Right. And it's a balance.
Yes.
It's a balance. If you can be effective and efficient, that's exactly where you want to be. But exploring and working on ways to do both, maybe on their own, or trying to find that balance between the two, is going to ultimately put you in the sweet spot, I think. And it's important also not to get stuck in one or the other. You can't think that, oh, I have to be the most effective and I have to give the correct demonstration. I have to give the correct explanation. I have to give I have to do everything correctly to be the most effective. Or, hey, I just got to get through everything pretty quick so that way everyone knows what's going on. You can't be stuck in either one exclusively. You need to have that good balance between the two. And like I said, that's going to be the sweet spot. That's going to put you at the next level and bring you to hopefully what you consider to be your best. And again, to benefit the students and give them those keys to success.
Absolutely.
As always, you can find us online, and we can continue our conversation about being effective and efficient. I'd be interested to hear what other people think is the most important, being efficient or being effective, and maybe some tools and drills they use to work on their efficiency or to improve their efficiency and be more effective. And not only that, but I think it'd be interesting to hear some of the issues you ran into before and how you overcame them, and to hear your thought process behind it, because that can transcend just a situation, but hearing what is your priority in your mindset and how that led you to solving your issues, I think can be beneficial to all of us. So you can find us online. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube. We're now on Instagram as well. On all these places, you can find us at MA Teaching Tactics, MA for Martial Arts Teaching Tactics. Again, that is MA Teaching Tactics. And if you didn't know, the reason I say we're on YouTube is because we record our podcast. So you can watch a video of us as we're sitting here across from each other discussing these things, and join us in our conversation, not only through the podcast, but in the video podcast as well.
And don't forget to comment on YouTube as well. And that'll be a great place for us to have that conversation or continue this conversation there too.
Yes, sir.
Until next time, I'm Chris Bean.
And I'm Chris Cant.